saw a presentation that Cristina was like giving at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. There's this like this disaster housing recovery group, and we meet probably like once a month, and then they invite different speakers to talk. And so Cristina was looking at equity and about the effort of the federal government to support underserved communities. And so she was doing like a very good analysis of it. And it has been like a while since then, so I'm sure that she learned like new things about it. So I'm really excited to hear her speak. I will just give an introduction of Cristina. So Cristina Muñoz de la Torre provides research, capacity building, and program evaluation support to community partners, and directs the research program for community-based projects. And Cristina brings 13 years of research and leadership experience in the area of climate, environmental justice, and natural hazards and disasters. She's a PhD candidate at the University of Iowa, where her dissertation analyzes the distribution of federal disaster assistance to low-income and BIPOC communities, implementing an equity framework. And she's a well-published author, so if you want to like check her out and check of some of her work, I'm sure that you will enjoy that. And she was like born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, California, and she's a first-generation Latina from Salvadorian and Mexican descent. So I would say Mexican. So again, thank you so much, Cristina, for being with us, and welcome.
Great, thank you. I really enjoyed hearing everybody's introduction, and as part of, something that I like to ask is to write your name, your affiliation, and then like your reason, like what was your question, your why for coming? Like, did you want to know a specific question? Were you curious about some other topic? Are you working on a project right now that this might relate to? Feel free to add it to the chat. That helps me kind of ground a little bit what I'm saying based on what I'm seeing. But also I am going to give a huge disclaimer and say that since I did the analysis and now I have been in parental leave, I had my first baby, and so I was MIA for 3 months. So that's a disclaimer that I wasn't completely wasn't following anything while I was gone, and I'm now just catching up. So I'll be very humble and admit that it's very likely that you guys are more caught up than I am. But I think what I really enjoy about this and what I want to make room and space for is that we're all here and we're all bringing knowledge to make time for a conversation. And the last thing I do is, obviously there's going to be Q&A, but what I like to do is the same thing I just did right now. You put your name and then a question as a result of the presentation. You type it in, because even if we don't get to it, I like to copy and paste this and then follow up on the conversation. So hopefully this is just the beginning of that. Okay, so I'm gonna start sharing screen. And as Evie's mentioned, I do have dissertation papers around like the actual data analysis of FEMA. I always like to talk about that. And that's more data heavy, more research academic side. But this presentation is more on like the policy side. So I'm looking at FEMA's Equity Action Plan that they published in April 2022 as a result of the executive order, and kind of assessing like what's in there, in particular with regards to equity. So I'm here representing Just Solutions Collective, As a senior researcher, we are a national organization that we work with BIPOC frontline communities on climate and environmental justice issues by providing research and policy analysis for these communities. And we're also producing research and analysis at the national and state level in terms of policies that are coming out. So, and Amy's already went a lot about my background. I thought there would be a lot more planners in the group, so I was going to show off my planning background. I was 4 years working as a community-based planner, where I did a flood resilience action plan and engaged communities and surveying. And I think I'll still share those links for those who are interested. But it sounds more like we have more female people than planners, which is really interesting. So this is the agenda. Again, mostly focusing on this one document. And so part of the reason why for some of my audiences in our group around environmental justice, like what is the relationship between FEMA and environmental justice? And obviously we know that FEMA responds to disasters, not just climate, but also terrorist and COVID events. So, but with regards to climate, we know that climate change and disasters more affect low-income and BIPOC communities. Yet, based on some of the research that we've seen, the assistance itself doesn't necessarily go to more BIPOC communities, historically speaking. And so, and another thing is that these inequities further produce more inequities. And so that's why it's important to consider equity.
Cristina,
and its role on eBay. Yeah.
so sorry to interrupt, but a few of us are having trouble hearing you.
Okay, let me see. Let me try to check my, thanks for interrupting, better. Important to hear.
It sounds like a little bit echoey, I guess.
Okay, let me try logging back in through a different computer.
Can you guys hear me better now?
That's like way better.
Okay. I was not gonna try to figure out that computer. I was like, I'm gonna go all extreme, but no, where something
Mhm.
so reliable. Okay, so thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna ask Evie's help with this computer setup. I can't see you guys at all because it's just one screen. So Evie, if you see like a question, can you just flag it down for me, please?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. So I will
Okay.
probably will do that towards the end, if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, and I have to share. I'm having trouble sharing. I think I'm gonna share the link to you, Evie, and if you can share it for me, please.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Okay. And the last thing, Evie, is that in closing the Zoom, I lost the chat with all the questions that people had. So
Oh, yeah, sure,
just make
yeah.
sure to save that. Okay. So
Okay.
I shared the link if you can share it for me. I'm on,
Yes,
I think,
I've not gotten it.
slide number 6.
No, it doesn't seem like I still have gotten it.
Are you able to open it?
I haven't gotten it yet.
Oh, I sent it via chat, sorry.
Oh,
Via the
all
Zoom
right.
chat.
I got it now on the chats. Yeah, sorry. I was like, I got it in my email. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good now.
Okay. And presentation mode on slide 6. Just one more slide. Okay, and so I already mentioned the executive order, and because of all the technical difficulties, I'll just skip this slide too. To save some time. So I think overall, big wise, like the equity action plan that came out from FEMA, it's not necessarily like an actionable plan, and like especially if there's still planners in the group, you know, we think about a plan as something you can start acting on with some direction, and that's not the case for this document. It's more of like what I was calling like equity thoughts, considerations within FEMA's programs. They covered this 6 programs within FEMA in terms of what are some equity considerations. And if you click on the next button twice, just click next twice. Each of these programs, thank you, just that. Each of these programs, evaluation on equity range from just 1.5 pages to 3 pages. So the robustness was varied, and they were looking to 4 different kinds of criteria, which is what are the barriers to equitable outcomes? What are the intended impacts? Like how can we, like what are actions to reduce those barriers, and how they're going to track progress and accountability. Next slide, please. And just click on it, I think 6 times. So that's it. For my analysis, because of the solutions collective focus for BIPOC and frontline communities. I wanted to understand whether different programs knew who they were serving and what they meant by equitable to whom, basically. And whether they actually identified actions around equity for these groups, or just kind of like actions to improve overall, which is just in general. Next slide, please. Actually, go back one more. Go back once. Thank you. Then the other criteria is with regards to tracking progress, like whether any thoughts were considered in how they're going to keep track of those actions and the progress towards equity. So being able to identify something really particular. And number 4 is like whether they're planning on engaging frontline, low-income, and vulnerable communities as part of their equity action plan. And then the last 2 is about accountability. The first one's around accountability to the communities themselves, and the last one is accountability within the organization. Like, is there any infrastructure, any systems or processes that are going to be developed so that they can keep themselves accountable and track the progress that each program is making within FEMA and FEMA in general. Next slide. And just click twice. I think there's some issues with that. But so as I mentioned, they covered 6 programs. The last 2 were National Flood Insurance Program, and then another, like there was a couple of programs that they had these ideas for equity actions, but then had this huge disclaimer in saying that we can't do anything unless there's statutory changes or this other, program changes first. And so I'm excluding them from this analysis, and I'm focusing primarily on the first 3, which is the Public Assistance Program, Individual Assistance, and Hazard Mitigation Assistance. And so in terms of what is in the Equity Action Plan, there are 6 general actions that they identified. And the most notable around equity is the idea to, let me step back one minute, public assistance. So for those who don't know about public assistance in FEMA, this program is one of the largest programs in terms of disaster assistance and relief. It provides millions of dollars for public infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and buildings that are privately owned but have public kind of facing resources, and it funds nonprofits as well, some nonprofits. And so with regards to this program, one of the proposed equity actions was a commitment to developing a process for recipients and subrecipients to report their strategies for equitable response, or in other words, like their strategies for allocating assistance. And this implies, and is significant because it implies that in reporting that strategy, you're having to defend or at least provide some reasoning for the allocation of funds, which for right now is solely in discretion of the governor, and there's not like a tracking of like subrecipients and subrecipients under that, like how the money gets distributed and why. So the strength in this equity action is that it's going to allow, hopefully, for more transparency on why funds are distributed, and in which case allows communities to be able to organize around whether these reasons make sense and whether they're fair. A big weakness around this proposed action is that it's still unclear whether reporting will be mandatory, whether it will be standardized, and whether there will be any consequences for people who don't report or people who report and you're seeing clear biases in the allocation of funds. Next page. And again, click that again. Thank you. Individual assistance is one of the biggest programs in terms of assistance directly to individuals and individuals basically, whereas public assistance is given to states and localities, cities, and tribal nations. Individual assistance is primarily targeted at individuals and families. And for this proposed program, they had 21 actions. There's a lot longer list of actions, but not all of them were related to equity. You know, some of them are just like improvement metrics. But one of the more significant actions was that of allowing self-certification for mobile homes, travel trailers, and heirship properties, which is significant because a lot of low income and communities of color inherit homes or share homes and also own mobile homes, and there's just not a formal way of tracking sometimes the way that properties are inherited. And it's especially true in Puerto Rico, where the bureaucratic process is just less formal. And so a strength for this is hopefully it opens more opportunities for low income and communities of color to be able to show that they are owners of a home and receive assistance for that home that was destroyed and their needs as a result of a disaster. One of the biggest weaknesses so far, even as it's already been implemented, is that there's still a lot of, it's been implemented not consistently. Different organizations on the ground know or don't know how to be flexible around identification of ownership. And it's still a major issue in Puerto Rico as well, and in other places where you still saw a lot of denial of assistance because of the inability to show proof of ownership of your home. Next slide. Again, thank you. With hazard mitigation assistance, this is, whereas individual assistance and public assistance is with regards to recovering from a disaster, the hazard mitigation assistance program focuses on mitigation and trying to prevent future disaster impacts by being proactive in proposing and implementing structural mitigation and zoning, but mostly physical infrastructures like flood walls, etc. It also requires a mitigation plan. So in the equity action plan, there were 16 actions outlined. Again, not all of them necessarily equity, just 16 actions that they had identified. And two of the most interesting and aligning with equity is the idea of prioritizing technical assistance to underserved communities, and especially helping communities identify and developing a plan, like a hazard mitigation plan before they're able to propose implementing projects. And they're also including BRIC and FMA considerations around equity for the evaluation of whether grants are approved whether applications are approved for these grants. The significance is that currently right now there's a lot of rural, low income and small communities and BIPOC communities that don't have planning departments, don't have large emergency mitigation departments to be able to do the pre-work of planning a mitigation for mitigation before they're able to apply for implementation. And so a strength would be that this would hopefully open the doors and the competitive edge to these communities that don't have that existing resources, because they would receive the technical assistance to be able to complete these plans and compete in the grants. But it's still not very clear, like the extent into which it will be a full cycle technical assistance, the the depth of it and what kind of assistance would be given in this process. Next. So as I mentioned there, that's it. Just go back a couple of times, sorry. Yeah, go back one last time. So, sorry, go back to just once forward. Okay, so I just quickly went over the first three, PAI and HMA, and I had done a slide on the 6 criteria that I was looking at. So can you click next? So those 6 criteria are outlined on that column. So again, does it address specifically the BIPOC communities that the program is trying to serve, or the frontline communities? Does it specifically identify at least 2 actions that are equity related? Does it identify 2 metrics that track this progress? Does it include frontline communities in the outreach and engagement? Is it accountable to the community? And finally, does it have internal accountability? So now you can click on all 4. Thank you. So overall, like when you're looking at these 4 programs, for example, across these 6 criteria, you can see that individual assistance scored, like actually met those criteria better, just because it has more green cells than the rest of them. And overall, the area where it was weakest across all programs was criteria number 3, which is identifying relevant metrics to keep track of this progress. So here you can see more clearly, like all the equity actions that were really relevant. Public assistance has 2, and that's row number 2. Public assistance has 2 regards to technical assistance. Individual assistance has, looks like 7, because they're also going to include address language barriers, etc. So yeah, so the biggest takeaway is there's still a need to identify, to actually keep track of progress. There's still a need, and another need is just the fact that a lot of these programs didn't speak at all as to being accountable to the communities or have a clear engagement plan developed, except for individual assistance and HMA. So yeah, I think that while there's still some good actions identified, there's still a lot of room in order of especially identifying who are the frontline communities, how they're going to be engaged, and how they're going to keep track of the progress of improving equity for these communities. Next slide. And click it, I think, one more time. Overall, like there is this a need for identifying equity outcomes that are aligned more with the actions that they're proposing, a better understanding of who are the communities in need, which I will talk about in a minute, and just to clarify more on the different, like from the recipients to the subrecipients, how are we going to make sure, like if equity is important at the FEMA level, like are we keeping accountable city, state, you know, are we keeping that accountability as we go down and more down in the hierarchy? Next slide. So in terms of recent implementation, one thing is that this equity action plan is embedded, or in some ways it can be seen as embedded within FEMA strategic plan, which does have equity considerations as well, which I didn't talk about. but also, and outside of the strategic plan, there's also the Justice 40 initiative, and FEMA has 4 programs, so you can click a couple more times. I think that's it. Yeah, so FEMA has 4 programs right now that are participating in Justice 40 initiatives. And that's definitely going to be, that's one of the most big recent developments is the participation of the BRIC, which is the Building Resilience Infrastructure in Communities, the Flood Mitigation Assistance, the Risk Mapping and Planning Program, and the Regional Catastrophic Preparedness Grant Program. Like, although the last 2 weren't included in the Equity Action Plan that FEMA published, the first 2 were, and I think that's why the first 2 were kind of spearheaded in terms of starting to integrate equity into the programs and kind of leading that those tasks. I think one of the biggest things is starting to track what is changing within BRIC and FMA as a result of participation in Justice 40, and seeing whether these actions are being implemented within these 4 programs. Next slide is just some of the resources that I mentioned at the very beginning around evidence for FEMA's historically being inequitably distributed for low income and communities of color. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Cristina, for your presentation. Even though we have like some technical difficulties, at the end, your mic was way better. Because yeah, it was a little bit hard. Sorry if I did something wrong with the, going forward, going back.
It's okay. It's
the way it is.
Yeah.
So in terms of like,
I would like people to just take a minute to just write their question. Everybody just take your time to write it down, because I know like sometimes when I write down my question, I can say it better when I because sometimes people ask their question, they're thinking about it, and then their question is like the thought process. So yeah, just take a moment to write your question, or like a discussion question that you want to have with the rest of the group. And then as soon as you're ready, just feel free to raise your hand and we can have you unmute and just start